All right, everybody, and welcome back to. I see my camera is actually in the view now. That isn't supposed to happen. My apologies. Anyways, weathering. Why weathering? Well, because sometimes when models look brandly like freshly painted, it doesn't really fit a scene, a setting, or something. So I want to talk about weathering. And I'm going to show you some miniature examples of what I'm talking about by placing three really small scale vehicles on the table. And I will zoom in for you so we can look at this a little better. And I will even do this. So here we first off have the vehicle that is the one in the picture for this class. And as you can see, this is a dirty tank. We have mud all down in the running gear here. We have everything looks muddy, has streaks, has dust all over it. Even the underside has oil leaks here and there. And it just looks like a tank that has been used. The same for this truck. It doesn't look necessarily very weathered. Doesn't have like huge scratch or burns or anything, but it is. You can kind of see that the metal is worn, and you can also see all the dust lower down on the vehicle. Then we have this tank, which wasn't supposed to be weathered too much, but you can see it has dust here and there, and also has a lot of small scratches. And these are stuff that I want to show you how to do. And that is what we will learn in this class. Let me move these braille scale vehicles out of the way. And let me introduce you to a somewhat larger palette that we're gonna use for demonstration purposes. This is a 1/35 scale tank, which hasn't been fully assembled, as you can see, but it is what I will use for demonstration on how to weather, because it's a big surface and it has a lot of details. So the very first thing that I do to any miniature or any vehicle that I start with is a pin wash. And a pin wash is basically where you're trying to emphasize all the small details. Like you can see there is a panel here with a groove in it, even if I hold it up closer to you, but there's really no definition of that line. The same with the grill up here. It's just green. And also on this side, you can also see that it doesn't have any definition. So a pin wash is a wash that you do place directly down this down here in the lines and around details to give the vehicle a bit more definition. And if I turn this around, you will see exactly what I mean. This is a pin washed side. You can immediately see that every detail pops a lot more. You can see all the nooks and crannies have definition, even the rear sprocket wheel here. And this is done with a I've used brown for this one specifically, but there are many colors. You can also see the difference here, and I think pin wash is one of the main techniques to know. You can see how the pin wash makes really nice definition on the grills here, but nothing on the left side, which doesn't have a pin wash. You can see that the pin wash leaves off some dirty areas here and there, which just naturally make it look sort of, weathered. And this doesn't take much at all. And what I use for a pin wash, you can use any wash you want. You can even thin down regular paint. But I like to use the Tamiya Panel Accent Color Dark Brown. I very rarely use any other color than this, because brown, if you use black, it gets really dark and doesn't look as good, in my opinion. But brown is like a very good, not too dark, but gives definition. And I want to show you how to do this. This is an enamel wash, which means it works slightly different than acrylics and makes it perfect for our use as a pin wash. Now what I've done is, as you can see, I have gloss varnished this side, and the gloss makes the pin wash flow a lot more easily. But it is not necessary to use. A gloss varnish will also slightly protect the paint under for the next process we're going to use. We're going to do with the pin wash. But just going to demonstrate this for you. Good thing about the Tamiya accent panel line accent colors that comes with a brush, just like their glue. So if I place this color right here, you will see that it starts flowing around. It just easily flows up and down. You can see that this hasn't been shaken well. I'll do it on the Vortex painter. Sorry for the loud noise. There's an electric mixer. And the good thing about a pin wash is that we don't really have to be too careful about where we place it, but we have, because we will clean it up later. But you can really see that this is already starting to get definition, which is exactly what we want, but it also gives you that weathered look. If you use an acrylic wash, you need to be a bit more precise on where you're placing it. That was a lot. Just take this from there. Also, everybody, you are welcome to ask questions as we go along, because I will be showing off quite a few techniques. And also, if we flip it to the upper side, you can see this side has been matted down while this is still gloss. And this was really thin, I think. But we can just start applying this everywhere. You can see it starts seeping around. But you can also see that it does make definition. Also around all the bolts on the top here. But that's enough for the demonstration purposes. Now, you can say, hey, Lasse, you made a big mess. Why, yes, I did. But we can clean that up. Usually we wait till it's a little bit drier than this. But what we can do is take a cotton bud, and we can very gently start removing it. But there's still parts left there. But that's when we have a question that I would like to answer. There's really no difference in it being enamel over other surfaces, I can actually show you, because if we do the front portion here, it has not been varnished at all, and it will seep around just fine. But I will show you one of the small issues we can have with this when it starts drying a little bit, because that's one of the things I'm going to show, because right now we are going to introduce a paint thinner. This is basically white spirits, but it is odorless, so it doesn't kill you with smell. And we can load up our cotton bud with this. And what happens is, to areas that are dried, we start reactivating the pin wash. And that way we are able to clean off the excess without any issues at all. And as you can see here, the only place where it's left is where it's supposed to be. You can also hear I'm kind of dragging it down into the plastic. What you can also do, to be a bit more careful with it, is you can load up your cotton bud and you can start to just roll it over to reactivate the enamel. And then you can let it reactivate for a while before you very carefully start rubbing it off. Should be said that this specific area of the tank has like an anti-slip texture to it, so it is not clean, clear, flat plastic. So there's always small areas the pin wash can get into. But you can see that it cleans up really nice once you let the activator work for a few seconds. Now, if you let this preferably sit for a few minutes, you may let the white spirit activate it for a short while before you start rubbing it off. But you can see that it gives you a lot of definition, but also a more weathered look. See down here, it wasn't really too dry, so I just kind of removed everything. But if we go to the front here, let me just get a new clean cotton bud so you can see it better. I can load up the cotton bud again. And if we take a little bit closer look here, this is unvarnished. So one of the problem is, if I start rubbing, is that the paint comes off, as you can see right there. Because white spirit can be kind of harsh. Now, I did apply quite a bit of force there for demonstration purposes, but it is really easy for that to happen. But then you can also, as said, just reactivate it. And what I always use is an old brush, a very old brush, as you can see here. It's not pretty at all, but apply some thinner to it. You can get odorless thinner at most paint shops, or well, paint shops too, but also hobby stores. But the good thing here is you can be a lot more precise about where you clean up. And then, by just being very patient and taking quite a few passes, you are able to take off the pin wash without removing the paint. But that is basically the only downside to not varnishing, is that you just have to be more gentle, use a bit more time. So I always varnish because I'm an impatient guy. But you can see it leaves off quite a nice definition. And you can always use the brush to go in and be very detailed to where you remove stuff. And you can just use the cotton bud for the main cleanup. And that's how you apply a pin wash that is enamel based. And that is the result you should get, which is a nice definition. Everything pops, gives the green boring camo color or the green color a good break, and then you can matte varnish it after. But if you don't, this dries 100% matte, so there's no need to do that, just if you're impatient. And that is one of the techniques. The next technique I want to show is micro scratches. And for micro scratches, you basically only need a color that is somewhat brighter than this color. If we bring in our little tank here, you can see it has a yellow base, and all the micro scratches you can see, for example up here, just a pale yellow. Some people want to do micro scratches in a really dark color, but that is not really necessary. It depends a little bit on how weathered you want it to look. And I will demonstrate by adding some bright green to the wet palette, which is somewhat clogged. Let me just fix that. There we go. And then we have a dark red color, which here is known as dark rust, which can be for the really deep scratches that goes down to the bare metal. It's also to specify that when you do weathering, less is very often more. And I can't really specify that enough, but if you look at real world vehicles or real world stuff that is weathered, you find out that many miniatures are often over weathered, but it is also, the scale is smaller, so you kind of need to emphasize and exaggerate a bit. But anyways, we take our brush, we load it up with some green, and we can very gently start stippling the green color on top. And along sides. So it kind of works like an edge highlight, but it's not specifically. And what I sometimes find is that a wet palette may make the paint a little bit too wet, so I'll just quickly bring in my dry palettes. And micro scratches does take time, but it can also up the level quite a bit, and then you can just do thin lines and keep on scratching the top around hatches. Maybe you can also start thinking where people walk on the vehicle, maybe scratch up areas there as well, especially around hatches that are opened. Can always do more scratches and along edges. And as you can see, this just gives the entire model a little bit more visual interest. Also do the handle here, maybe something on the hatch itself. And it can take time to like work around an entire model, but hopefully you can see the results it gives as well, especially combined with the pin wash, especially under here where a lot of dirt and stuff are getting thrown up. This is a very saturated green. I would probably choose something less saturated, but and maybe a tad brighter. But you can also easily do micro scratches in more colors and to give it even more variation. But I'm gonna add in some of the dark rust color And where stuff are really being worn, probably around hatches again, I can add in a little bit of that to just kind of show that these scratches are even deeper down to the bare metal. Just by building up that, we already have several scratches in that little area. And of course we could do the same on the side here. The bottom where dirt is getting picked up, we can probably see a lot of dirt being kicked up and scratching the paint. And then we can even add another shade of green to really emphasize even more. But that gives you the idea of micro scratches in a quick go. Now, if I remove this here, I will also show you dust effects, which are done with enamels again. And these dust effects are precisely the only dust effect I did on this truck. And what I've used for that is Ammo by MIG Nature Effects Light Dust. But you can use any other enamel color for this as well. And this is how it looks. And for this, I would suggest to use enamels and not anything else. And I will bring in, if I can find them on my table, there, right in front of me, are these two road wheels. If you look at this one, it's fresh off the factory colored, but this one, let's see if I can get them even better in focus here, has gotten a pin wash and also the dust effects. No scratches though. If this had scratches as well, it would look way better. But so we want to replicate this on this, and that's quite easy. Take your old beaten up brush, load it up, and you basically smear this on there. Then you figure out that that was way too much, but that's okay because we can just start removing it because enamels take short moment to dry. And what I did with this I do not know if they are pet safe, but I would suggest just keeping them out of reach for pets, and you should be good enough. But I could look that up and write in the Discord for you. But since this dries so slow, we are also able to manipulate the effect and where it dries as it dries. And as with the other one, we can use the paint thinner to carefully clean up again if we ever think the effect is too much. And then it will dry matte like this. And I think even though this was prepared a few days ago, if we load the brush up with thinner, we can start to reactivate the enamels here. It may take a little while for it to activate. And that way we could even start changing up everything. But those will dry as matte as this. And if you just clean it up as you go, You can also see these tires have grooves in them, and that is another perfect way of using enamels, because you can just slather the light dust effect on top here, and as it starts drying you can just clean off all the ridges, so it looks like the dust has really settled in. You do get these enamels from numerous manufacturers. It doesn't even have to be like an effect specific, it just has to be enamels, and then you can easily go on. And what you can also do with this is to just load up your brush and just start slathering in all the details, and then eventually that will also dry with a fine dusty effect. And I will show you this at the end of the stream, so you can see how that has dried by just me slathering it on there. Now the next step, or another effect we can do, is one that is quite popular, and it is called streaking grime, which is a product you can buy from numerous manufacturers. It's basically an enamel type of color, and streaking grime it is a very effective technique for, well, making grime that is streaked. You can see this is track wash, but it's just a slightly different color. You can see the enamel goo here. But I'll load up my brush with some track wash. I'll take off some excess, and we just imagine this is the streaking grime effect, because I do realize that on Discord and stuff, many people are curious about streaking grime. And we can just place this just basically there. Works. You can also do it a couple of other spots for demonstration purposes. And what this is basically creating like an effect that rain has basically fallen down on the vehicle over time, or the surface, or whatever you're painting, and it starts streaking, and you can see that on houses, facades, steel, I mean machines that are just standing still. But we just lather that on there, and it doesn't look streaky at all. So once again, we will go ahead with the paint thinner. Now we don't want a moist brush, we just want a damp brush. And what we can do here with the damp brush with thinner is to just start very slowly streaking downwards. And we will eventually just have a panel that is entirely brown. But the technique here is we can wipe off a lot of the bottom, either with a paper or your finger, and then we can start streaking it even more. And it usually loads up in the bottom here, but just keep on repeating this. Moisten up the brush a little bit again. And it looks glossy, but this will dry matte. And here you can really regulate how how much of the streaks you want to be shown. You can clean this almost entirely off. And as I said, less is usually more when it comes to weathering. If we start looking there, you can sort of see the streaks. It is kind of difficult to see them right now as it's still drying, but I will let this dry. But now you've seen the technique. And of course, as this side has started to dry a little bit more, it's harder to make the streaks go down. That's the thing with enamels. I always recommend like letting it dry for a few, like a minute before you start working with it. You can absolutely see the effect there. And around these soles, which are meant for people to put their shoes in, you could actually see a lot of these streaks going down because the grime of their boots gets, like they place some mud there and then it just rains off. I mean, you don't put your boots in there, but it is to climb up the tank. That's why it's sort of a ladder, and this would be the next step, and that would be the next step. It's basically how to climb the vehicle. And being aware of what certain details are used for in the real world will also make you able to place weathering where it's more natural for it to form. We can also use streak and grime or track wash here to just really dirten up a specific area as well. So we can just pile this up right here. Or we could go a little bit more careful in another spot to just sort of represent people, you know, working around their vehicle. And all of these techniques could also be used for plate armor for medieval stuff that would also get weathered. It can also be used for clothes, fabric. Kind of depends. It's again, it's more your creativity that limits you. But you may look at all these fancy enamel wash and stuff and just think, is there like a cheaper, better way? And yes, there is. And I will introduce you to really cheap oil colors that you can buy at basically any low cost arts and crafts store. I bought a set of, I don't know, 12 of these for very little money. Buy yourself one of these metal mixing pots. And my favorite is burnt umber. You can get this in higher quality as well in a bigger tube, specifically only burnt umber. But this is oil based, but it has a lot of the same properties that enamels have. But it requires a little bit more work. One of the good things with oil paints is you can just use oil paints too to just like create more mud. Maybe even, you know, someone has been walking here. That works too. But we can also introduce a little bit of thinner in here. And we can play around with how thick we want this. And this can also be our pin wash. That was a little bit too thick for a pin wash. And this too could be cleaned up with the thinner, just as I showed you guys. You can really fine tune the mixing here, but as you can see, it flows around just like the pin wash did. And then you can clean off the excess with the thinner, just as with the enamels. But if you keep mixing this a little thicker, something like this maybe, then this too can be your streaking grime. Without letting this dry, we can just start making the streaks, and you can see more or less the same effect is being made. Maybe this was even a little bit too thin, but you get the idea. There's a question about storing oil washes for a longer time, and I don't actually know how long this stores. I've used oil wash a week after, but I really only haven't really needed it that long, so I've gotten rid of it. So I do not know how long it will last or while standing out, but at least a week, maybe more. Oil paints dry really, really, really slow to fully cure. Now you can see here we can start cleaning up the wash we made with the oil. And it's really flexible, and we can start even cleaning this bigger spill out if we don't like the footsteps we made. Again, we can just use some of the thinner, and we can start removing it a bit. If we don't want to remove everything, maybe we want to spread this out a little bit more. You can see the flexibility of it. You can really fine tune exactly what you want and make this a very nice fade. And as you can see on the streak and grime here, it started to dry more properly. Let me turn on a second light here so you can see it a bit better. You can see it started to dry, and you do see that nuance of streaks going down, especially compared to the clean surface here. You can see the oil is still glossy because it's still wet, but it's getting there. Now we also have a faster way of adding dust to your vehicle. You can actually look here at the dust that we did that with the enamels. That's starting to look quite good. But I want to dust up this side here that we started with first. And we can easily do that with our airbrush and an acrylic tan color, or whatever color you want your dust to be. And I will show you this really simple technique by adding in one drop into my thinner there. Let's mix that properly. And then, easily, from a distance, we can just is that more thinner than paint? I think we need to add a little bit more paint. Mix it up. Let's see how that paints. That's brilliant. You can see here. Then, from a distance, maybe more on the back, maybe down here as well. And there. Very simple way of adding a dusty layer. It kicked on. There we go. There you can see we added really quickly a layer of dust. And if you combine that with all the other stuff we did, you're starting to get a really good weathered look. I see we have 5 more minutes here. So I will accept questions while I tinker away a little bit more, fine-tuning the things we have here. Oils through an airbrush. I am actually not sure at all. I do not use it. I can use enamels through my airbrush, but it requires a little bit more cleaning after on. But I have really never tried with oil, so I can't really. I guess if it's thin enough, it works, but you may have a cleaning project going on. Here you can also see the oils versus the enamels. So if there's more questions, feel free to ask them. For battle damage, there are many ways you can do that as well. That's a good thing about weathering. There's really no one way to do it. But one easy technique is to add, I think a bullet ping would sort of be, a thicker scratch in the paint, basically, is you could add a really bright color, like the sand color we did, and you can add the darker color, the dark rust color that I used, and we can start off. This is going to be a little bit crude because it's just for showing. If we want to add, let's say something bigger has hit this piece here, we can simply add a rather big bright point, and then with our darker color, because this looks very out of place, we can very gently there we go. That sort of looks like we are way deeper into the metal. And that is one way of doing it. And you can also use a metallic in there as well. But if you want to have a proper bullet gouge, you would need to make a gouge into the plastic and then paint that. As for acrylic paints and being more precise, it's quite simple. It is because acrylic paints dry really fast. The acrylic wash dries, and when it has dried, you can't reactivate it. And since you can't reactivate it, when you painted the wash onto the model, that's where the wash is. So if you want to do the all the panel lines here, you would have to be very careful with your brush loaded with acrylic wash and just get it just down there, because cleaning it up after is nigh impossible. But here you can see the enamels here have dried up. I just add a white spirit to reactivate it, and I can absolutely clean off all the wash here, which gives you a lot more flexibility to mess around. And weathering is supposed to be messy anyways. And that's what I meant by that. It doesn't necessarily matter how big the model is. The only difference is you get more details on a bigger one. And on smaller models, you can get away with a lot less. we take this super tiny model, which is 15mm truck. And if we get focus here, there we go. You can see I have micro scratches on this side there, and a few other places here and there. And then I have the dust effect. And apart from the pin wash, that's all the weathering I did on this truck. And it looks quite good because it's such a small scale. But when it's bigger, you just need to be more... I guess you just have to do more because the simplicity can be seen, if that makes sense. But then again, less is more. And like, I think the streaks here are way too prominent because it looks like this tank has just been out for years and years and years. So I'd probably clean this up even more. All I want is to not have it as bright as this, but not necessarily wanting it to look very old. But if you want it to look very old, you can do that as well. I hope that made sense. Here you can see the dust again through the airbrush. I did the dust on the bottom on this one, and then I hit it a bit more with even more weathering. But you can sort of see, if we can focus, the dust layer here, because the colors appear a little bit more sharp and this sort of fades because of that dust through the airbrush. Here's a look at the road wheels again, for those who wanted to look at that. It's funny, cameras have autofocus, but it never works. There we go. And unless there are any more questions, I will sign this class off. You can keep asking me questions on the Squidmar Discord. There's an own section for this class and the previous class. Actually, every class in the on SquidCon. But that is basically a few techniques you can play around with when it comes to weathering. And I thank you for tuning in. I hope you learned something and got inspired to dirty up your vehicles or models. It doesn't have to be vehicles. This can be used for everything. Absolutely everything. And with that, I'll stop the stream. And I'll thank you again all for joining SquidCon Day 1. Next event is in 12 minutes, and it will be a painting challenge, but that will be on the Discord that I mentioned, which will probably be linked in the chat somewhere around this window you're looking at. All right, thanks guys, and happy modeling.